Welcome to this session of the Ancestral Healing Summit. I'm Lisa Bunnies, your host, and my guest for this session is Tom DeWolf. Our topic today is racial healing, coming to the table for truth-telling, liberation, and transformation. Tom DeWolf is co-author with Sharon Leslie Morgan of Gather at the Table, which won the Phyllis Wheatley Award for Best Nonfiction Biography and Memoir in 2013. Since then, Tom has served as director and manager for Coming to the Table, where he now serves as co-manager with Jody Geddes and is here with us today. Tom, thank you so much for joining us. I can't wait to get into this conversation. Welcome.
Oh, you're welcome, and thanks for having me.
Well, absolutely. I can't wait to talk about this. So let's go ahead and start here. Tell us, if you don't mind, about your ancestral background and the connection to the legacy of slavery.
I didn't find this out until my late 40s, I think. I'm distantly related to the largest slave trading dynasty in U.S. history. This was a family that for close to 50 years operated in slave ships throughout the Triangle slave trade. And this is from the 1770 until it was outlawed in 1820 in this country. And over 100 voyages. There's something like 500,000 of the African people's descendants are likely alive today. The second largest, this family having done more than 100 voyages, the second largest was like 30. So they were deeply embedded, and the main guy was a state senator from Rhode Island, a United States senator for a time from Rhode Island. When he died in 1837, he was the second richest man in America. During the War of 1812, this family had more ships than the United States Navy, which they used for a lot of privateering. And it was just unbelievable to me to learn this connection. And I got invited to participate in the making of a documentary film called Traces of the Trade, a story from the deep North. And it was a film that it premiered at the Sundance Film Festival and then was shown on PBS on the POV program. And it still gets shown regularly today at churches and libraries and community events and what have you. And it was us retracing the Triangle slave trade route of our ancestors. There were 10 of us, all white descendants of these enslavers. And I'm, technically descended from the older brother of the first slave trader. And this information didn't come to my family. I found out because a friend of mine in the town where I live in Oregon said, I think we might be related. My dad's middle name is DeWolf. And it all started from there in the mid 80s. And, meeting his father, this man was like a master genealogist, and he figured out how Dave and I were related, sixth cousins once removed. And it started me on a journey of learning, of coming to terms with this history and what it means for me personally, what it means for our nation. But being connected to that family, it changed my life, And when you get back that far, that's one line out of 250 or whatever. When you get back 7 generations. And so there's a million stories in everybody's life. This happens to be one in my life that shifted everything. And that's when I, wrote my first book, Inheriting the Trade, was my experience of that journey and making that film and having these amazing experiences and conversations of just uncovering what's been hidden.
Yeah, I definitely want to dig in more there. There's so much to ask about. But at first, I want to mention the remarkable fact that this was Rhode Island. That's about as far north as it gets. And I think most of us who have an average American education, it all happened down south. And this was,
That's
like I said, far north, and it was a government official.
It's really important to understand that aspect. Every one of the 13 colonies practiced slavery. In almost all of the slave trading, shipping was done out of the north, northern ports, northern ships, northern banks, northern insurance companies. Rhode Island was the largest. They did like half of the slave trading in the United States. Now, the internal slavery was mostly in the South. But still, I think it was in the mid 1750s, like half of the ministers, Christian ministers in the state of Connecticut owned people. And, they're itinerant preachers, they're traveling, they own people, they take care of the farm or whatever at home. And so this was practiced widely. New York, Massachusetts, nobody gets a free pass on this. And how it plays out over time, it's like cotton from the South goes to the mills in the north, and to create the cotton fabric. It's like when you look at the economy of that time, the entire world's economy was based in slavery. So you've got cotton and rice and coffee and tea and sugar and all these slavery produced commodities that are worldwide. And there was slavery in many other countries around the world. And it goes back to the beginning of time with human beings. We've treated each other pretty horribly forever, but it was the United States that shifted slavery into being a race-based thing. It's if you're Black in this country, the oppression is deep, it's universal, and there was no way out, almost no way out. So just understanding the depth and the breadth of what the whole system, and that's the thing, it's a system, it's a structure, it's like the plumbing beneath our houses, it's the distribution of water and waste. That's what slavery was to our nation and our nation's economy.
Mm-hmm. So how did you react then when you learned this news? I know when I learned my family history, there's some good people, there's some bad people, and
Right.
It does affect you. So what kind of effect did it have on you when you learned, oh my God, these are my ancestors?
There's two different points in time. When I first learned about this in the mid 80s, I was learning the fact that we're related to the Barrymore family, the acting family. Drew Barrymore's great aunt Ethel is married to a DeWolf, lived in the mansion that was built from the profits of the slave trade in Bristol, Rhode Island. Her grandson used to spend summers there, had a place there the first time that had a room there the first time my wife and I visited. So finding out that the author of Moby Dick, his aunt was married to a DeWolf. There's all kinds of the guy who played Paul Drake on the old Perry Mason show was a DeWolf. His middle name was DeWolf. The guy that made Casey at the Bat famous, that poem, Mighty Casey has struck out, was William DeWolf Hopper. So it's like, oh, we're related to all these amazing creative people. And then Dave's father said, and they were slave traders, rum runners, and privateers. Didn't make a huge deal out of that. And it sounded more like the Pirates of the Caribbean at Disneyland to me than anything nefarious. And it wasn't until 2001, when I got invited to participate in this journey, that I found out the real truth, the real depth and breadth of this family's involvement and our connection to half a century of slave trading and really the planting of the seeds that became all the racial discrimination and Jim Crow and lynchings and displacement and breaking up of families. That's us. And I want to be really clear, though. I have a lot of people when I'm, out speaking libraries or churches or conferences, is I've heard a lot of times white folks will say, "Oh, I'm glad I'm not you. I wouldn't want to be related to those people." And my instant response is, do you suppose that your ancestors wore cotton clothing, drank coffee, tea, sugar? I mean, the system involved everyone, and everyone who was white, from the poorest of the poor to the richest of the rich, benefited from the having of light skin compared to dark skin. And the opposite is true of people of African descent.
Yeah. Well, now let's talk about the book that, for folks who might be unfamiliar with the book that you co-authored with Sharon Leslie Morgan, Gather at the Table. Let's talk a bit about that. This is a fascinating story where Sharon was a descendant of slaves and you were a descendant of slave traders. So how and when did you and Sharon meet, and what was that first encounter like? That must have been a little nervous.
Okay. Because of Traces of the Trade and my first book, Inheriting the Trade, I was invited there were 5 of us from the making of the film that were invited to participate in a weekend retreat that was called Coming to the Table. And there were maybe 24 people. This was in 2006. And it was held at Eastern Mennonite University in Harrisonburg, Virginia, which is the home of the Center for Justice and Peace Building. And they do a lot of research and teaching around trauma awareness and conflict transformation, the utilization of circle process, restorative justice principles. And so there were 2 families. One is the Hairstons. There's a book called The Hairstons, An American Family in Black and White by Henry Winsek that tells the story of the Black and White Hairstons, which was one of the largest plantation-owning, slave-owning families in U.S. history, and how Black and White descendants got together and began to reckon with their history. The other family was the descendants of our 3rd president, Thomas Jefferson, Black and White, descendants of Thomas Jefferson and his wife, Martha, and descendants of Thomas Jefferson and the woman he owned, Sally Hemings, who was Martha's half-sister. They had the same father. And so the Hairstons and the Jefferson descendants were introduced by Henry Winsek, the author of the Hairston book. And from that, those 2 families were looking at a whole different view of what family reunion is, and connecting with people that their ancestors, from the Black perspective, you're meeting people whose ancestors owned you. And from the white perspective, you're dealing with people whose your ancestors owned. And obviously fraught with a great deal of emotion and anger, shame, rage, guilt, all of these things. And the tools that were offered through the Center for Justice and Peace Building were a way to cope, a way to deal with, a way to be effective and continue to grow authentic and accountable relationships with each other. So after that weekend, the next thing that happened was like 2 years later, a week-long class was offered at EMU during the Summer Peace Building Institute on Coming to the Table. And Sharon was invited to be there, and I was there, and that's where we met. And to be honest with you, we didn't really connect. That wasn't a huge class, 15 or 18 people, but she was on one side of the room, I was on the other. We just didn't make the connection that each of us did with others in the class. And it was a few months later, I was speaking at the University of Chicago, and I knew that Sharon lived there. And I just reached out to her and I said, hey, if you're around, I'm going to be speaking at this thing. And she couldn't, but she said, I'll stop by to give you a hug. That was the moment that she would take the time to come when she has other plans and just give me a hug and say hi. That was the beginning of our real connection. But it all came through coming to the table. And then it was at a retreat where we talked about writing a book together. We're both writers, and it's our way of sharing a story. And we felt like what we could do is try and live the coming to the table approach to racial healing together. And so that she can be with a white man. And what does it feel like to be in Money, Mississippi, in front of the ruins of Bryant's store, and what is it like for a Black woman to be in the same spot with a white man, or to be in Montgomery, Alabama, or, to be at a plantation in Louisiana? What does this feel like? And having those kinds of conversations with each other, and being stuck in a car. We drove 6,000 miles in, I don't know, less than a month, all throughout the sort of the eastern half of the United States. We ended up visiting something like 26 different states over the course of going to places of racial terror, places of racial healing, just places to learn, museums, and meeting with people along the way connected to this history. And, it was Sharon who insisted, if we're going to do this, we need to know each other's families as well. And so I visited her family. She has family in Southern California, in Chicago, in New York. I have family in Oregon and California. She came out here. We spent significant time with each other's families and have become quite close. We know each other's kids and grandkids, and developed not a working relationship, though that happened, but a real profound and loving friendship, trusting friendship with each other through this process, showing that if you do the work, this approach is really impactful, really powerful.
Mhm. Well, I definitely want to hear more about your story, your work together. But first, I want to make sure that we talk about the coming to the table approach, so that people understand what exactly this work is about.
Coming to the table has been around for 15, 16 years, and it's grown from that initial couple dozen people to now there's around 6,000 members around the country, and many around the world. And there's 50 or so local affiliate groups in 18 different states around the country. And anything I discuss about this is on the Coming to the Table website, comingtothetable.org. But the approach is basically 4 pillars. It's uncovering, understanding, acknowledging all of our history, not hiding anything, being open and honest with all of it so that we can reckon with it. And then there's building relationships, accountable, authentic relationships within and across racial lines in order to do this work with people that we develop a knowing and trusting relationship with. And there's working towards healing by any means necessary. It might be your faith community, it might be yoga, music, writing, art, whatever mindful way you have of working towards healing in terms of racial woundedness, go for it. And then the 4th pillar is taking action to undo systems of oppression. And that's what it is. It's systems of oppression. Structures that undergird real estate, education, criminal justice system, the medical, our health outcomes. So much of this is determined by our race based on the structures that we've built into our system from the beginning of this nation. So those 4 pillars are what undergird coming to the table. And then the practices that we utilize are understanding trauma, what it does to us physically, emotionally, spiritually, how to be resilient in the face of trauma. There's restorative justice practices. Typical justice is something bad happened, who did it, and what do they deserve? And restorative practices ask additional questions. Who all has been impacted by this harm? If my car gets broken into, all my neighbors are going to know about it, and they're going to be nervous about their cars in our neighborhood, so they're impacted. So who all has been impacted? What's their connection to this? And what are their obligations to help heal the wounds to the degree possible? I mean, there are wounds that cannot be healed. Someone is murdered, that doesn't get healed, but how can you heal it to the degree possible? And then a practice that we use regularly is a circle process, where using a talking piece, the person with the talking piece has the floor, so to speak, and there's no interruptions. It equalizes the room. It's not like in a classroom where the teacher's in charge, or the church where the preacher's in charge. It's an equalized room, and using that circle process and really understanding circles and how it works, how it's been used in indigenous couples forever, and how it can be useful in this work of understanding and really hearing each other, and having agreements of how we're going to be in space together. We call these touchstones, that we're going to approach this with a sense of wonder, with a sense of really hearing the other person. So that's sort of a long-winded introduction to the approach. Yeah. And in fact, Jody and I, Jody, my co-manager at Coming to the Table, we wrote a book with about a dozen other Coming to the Table members doing illustrative stories for each of the chapters, called A Little Book of Racial Healing, that lays out this whole Coming to the Table approach. Just really knowing that it works because we've experienced it together within this community. And so trusting that it will help, and that this works with, our focus is on racial healing between descendants of enslavers and descendants of the enslaved. But this whole approach is applicable to any sort of oppression based in gender, based in sexual orientation, based in religion, age, whatever the case may be. It's like, this is doing the real work of trying to repair, rather than trying to ignore and stuffing things under the rug and allowing our grandchildren the beautiful benefit of having to deal with it in the future.
Right, yeah. Now, I think for me, one of the biggest frustrations is that there are some white people who avoid doing racial healing work. They say things like slavery and Jim Crow are ancient history, and they wonder, well, just get over it. It happened a long time ago. What do you say to that?
It's really true, and it's all based in fear. Just being real blunt about it, is I'm afraid as a white person, am I going to lose my power? Is some black person going to want me to give them my house or my money? It's all this stuff. But the reality, working with Sharon, when we're writing Gather at the Table, I mean, the fact is, it isn't over. And the fact is, racial discrimination takes place every day. Black people are stopped by cops 10 times as often as white people are for frivolous reasons. White people and black people use illegal drugs at remarkably similar rates, but black people are charged and prosecuted, arrested and charged and prosecuted and jailed at 10, 20 times the number that white people are. And if they're both jailed, the black folks are spending a lot longer time in jail. So the system is set up to benefit me and harm people like Sharon. That's the way it is. And so for white people to deny this or to hide from this that's one of the privileges of being white. I can walk away. I don't have to do this work. I can just root for my favorite sports team, watch my TV shows at night, raise my family, go to work, not have to deal with it. I'm not the one that's being negatively impacted, but in fact I am. Because the reality is I live in an unhealthy society. I live in an unhealthy world, and that impacts me. I suffer from the separation, from the shame and the guilt. Even if I don't acknowledge it, it's there, it's living. And we watch it play out in our politics, and we watch politicians take advantage of this to keep folks separated so that they can retain power. And that's where I look at poor folks have an amazing amount in common, but rich folks have kept the poor folks separated and battling each other so that they don't realize it. And the consequence is the people at the top stay powerful and rich. The people at the bottom stay angry and unhealed, wounded.
And constantly slugging it out.
And slugging it out. And I really, going back to restorative practices, this is the obligation. I've been impacted by this history. And so I've got an obligation, just as a member of this human family, to do my best to lift up people who are suffering because of unjust systems.
Yeah. And I know another thing that I hear is, in fact, I can say this myself, my ancestors didn't have anything to do with slavery. They came over on the boats after slavery was deemed illegal. But that doesn't mean that I don't still benefit from systemic racism. So what can we do to level the playing field? How can we actually create reparations when there's such a battle against it? You mentioned earlier where people don't want to give up their privilege or whatever it is. They don't realize there really is enough to go around. It's as you mentioned, there's a few people who own everything and the rest of us are all scrambling around.
Yeah.
How do we overcome this?
Well, one thing is recognizing anytime a white person says, that's not my history, I've got nothing to do with this. I was able to say that until I was 47 years old and found out the real history. And when you go, most people know their grandparents. Some know their great-grandparents. Very few go much beyond that. So you're getting back 7, 8 generations now into when the slave trading was happened. Are you sure that you're not directly related to people who either owned people or traded people, or murdered and displaced indigenous people, or fought in the war that wiped Mexico out of California and Texas and New Mexico, what have you? So, and again, whether you've got a direct connection to those folks as your ancestors, you've got an absolute connection because we are all connected, as we've talked before. And so can you ask that question again? The last part. I'm sorry.
I was basically just wondering, reparations
Yes.
in theory seem like a wonderful idea, but we just can't seem to make it happen.
Well, it is happening, but on a small scale. There's groups like Reparations for Slavery that got started in Colorado. And you can find it online, reparations, 4 slavery.com or .org. And there's many groups like that. There are groups that white folks have started. There are college funds that are established to support specifically the descendants of people that their family had enslaved going to college. There's just now in Southern California recently, land was given back to a family it had been stolen from along the coast in Southern California. So there are acts of reparation taking place. But like you say, you've had HR 40 before the Congress forever. And it's had some hearings a couple of times, but it's never come to pass. And yet we did have Congress, both the House and the Senate, pass bills apologizing for slavery. Didn't go so far as to create any sort of reparations. But the thing I would say is reparations is a word that typically scares the crap out of white people. But look at what reparation is. It's repair. If I get into a fight with my wife, I want to repair the damage so that I can reconcile back to the healthy relationship that I know exists. Now, that's not happening between Black and white people. We're not reconciling to a decent relationship because it's never been there. So we're talking about transformation into something completely new, a new relationship that is based on equity, that's based on justice, it's based on accountability for all of us. And so the idea of reparation is real simple for me. We're repairing damage, and there's clear damage that has existed for hundreds of years and continues to impact people today. So it's a real easy one for me. And I think as white people are willing to talk through it, and especially talk through it with people of color, we can see then and understand better. It's educating ourselves. It's waking up. It's, white people have a lot of work to do in order to wake up, in order to be fully aware of our role in this. We've been saying it's got nothing to do with me for a really long time, and we're lying to ourselves.
Yeah. Thank you for allowing me to take the conversation there. I think that's really important.
Yeah.
I would like to, if you don't mind, tell us your work with Sharon, the
Yeah.
traveling that you did together. What was the biggest impact on your life? How did it change you?
I wouldn't say it's any individual location that we visited. It was the two of us together. I mean, we're in her car with her little dog. And so we, staying at cheap hotels that would allow pets. And we talked and talked and we fought and we laughed and we cried. And I mean, there was times when Sharon was so angry. And for me to be able to be in the circle of her rage at what happened to her ancestors, what has happened to her, what could potentially happen to her. I mean, we went to a cemetery to look for the grave of a white man she believed she was related to that had fathered some of her ancestors. She had been there before, she and a Black cousin of hers. And she said, here he is. I think the stone is face down. I think that's him. Let's pick that up. And he said, no way. Look over there. There's a tractor and there's a man and he's staring at us. Back in the car, they're out of there. She and I went back to that cemetery. I just whipped the headstone over. I'm a white guy. I knocked on somebody's door because we couldn't find the cemetery and wanted directions. And she said, I'm not going to that door. I knock on the door and I hear this little voice, Mama, there's a man at the door. And this lady opens the door. She's just gotten out of the shower. She's wrapped in a towel, but is perfectly comfortable answering the door for me and telling me where the cemetery is. That's something Sharon couldn't do. So witnessing that with her, witnessing what she experienced, being in places that made her so angry, she wants to put me out of the car, literally. Arguments that went late into the night where, using the coming to the table approach, we paused before we said anything that was really damaging, agreed to go to sleep, wake up the next morning and talk again. And it was easy then. We got up the next day, both had calmed down, both had worked through the issue and resolved things very quickly. But it was the conversations in the car, driving through a thunderstorm, deciding whether or not we're going to spend the night at a former plantation house. And she insisting we do, me not wanting to. And it was that. It was getting to know each other, spending time with each other's family. I mean, when we visited her family in Southern California, it was wild. I'm walking into this home where her cousin and her cousin's husband lived with 3 of their grown children. And so I'm walking into this. Here's the white guy. I'm going to sleep on the couch. And in fact, her cousin wanted to offer me one of the bedrooms and put one of the kids on the couch. And Sharon said, no way. He's sleeping on the couch. And I didn't know this until later on, but it was wonderful being in that experience for her to come with me to visit my family and we had like a big Thanksgiving meal together. So here's Sharon, the only Black woman with all white people, opposite situation. We're driving to my sister's, who lives way out in the boonies in Southern California. And we cross over this little bridge over this little tiny creek that is bone dry. And she says, what happens if that floods and that bridge washes out? How do we get out of here? I'm like, what are you talking about? Completely blue skies. We're only here for a few hours. That thing is bone dry. And then she explained to me about how Black people always need to have multiple ways out of a situation. I never would have thought of that. So it's those moments that shift everything. And then, being in locations together and experiencing various places in our nation's history that are so profound. And what does this feel like? I mean, to be where Emmett Till was kidnapped, brutally tortured, and murdered. That was powerful. Haunting.
Yeah. Wow. Well, thank you again for sharing that with us. And you bring up a really interesting point that I think that some white people, and me included, I'll cop to this. It's uncomfortable to have the conversations when there's this justified blazing rage that they're not able to speak, especially to a white person. And, it's difficult to just sit there and listen and not scramble around making excuses. I didn't do it. How did you allow, maybe that's the wrong word. Maybe how did you allow yourself to just sit and listen? Was this the coming to the table approach, or?
It absolutely is. I mean, it's, anything that we want to do, if we want to learn to play the piano, you got to learn how to play the chords. You got to know where a C is and a D is and an E is, and how to put them together in melodies. Everything in life that we do, we want to learn to dig trenches. We got to learn how to use a shovel effectively. We want to learn how to be good parents. We may read books, we may talk to friends, but we're going to learn how to be better parents to help raise our children the best that we can. This is another aspect of life where do the work, understand, and the only way to do it is to do it. And so spending time for white people, reading the books, read books by Black authors, read books by white authors that are dealing directly with these issues, understand. The thing about with the coming to the table approach is having these agreements, these touchstones on how to be, we're going to agree, we're going to be 100% present for this conversation. We're not going to try and fix each other in this conversation. We're going to listen deeply to the other person and not just prepare my comeback based on what I just heard, so I'm not really paying attention to them. Recognize we're not going to get to the end of the road today. This has taken hundreds of years to build up to where we are. It's not going to end with a one weekend racial healing seminar or reading one book. It's a lifelong journey, like all the important things in life are. So using this approach, it's tools. It's just tools. It's resources that help us to be more mindful of the importance of this work and my obligation, my role in it, to be present, to be aware, awake of what I'm doing, when I'm doing it, and not to take things personally, like I'm a horrible person if Sharon gets pissed off at me. What can I learn? What did I say that caused so much rage that we can work through here? Sharon and I were able to do that. And one of the reasons we did all this is racism is just too big. How do we, oh my God, how do we deal with something that is as ubiquitous as the air that we breathe? It's everywhere. Two people. And so building these relationships, and I have these relationships with people of European descent, people of African descent, as well as people of Asian descent, of Latinx descent, of, it's like, this is for Christians and non-Christians. It's for Jews and Muslims. It's for atheists. It's for men and women of all ages. It's a set of tools that help us deal effectively with this work. I mean, we naturally possess the curiosity, the wonder to figure stuff out. We naturally possess that. So if we practice it, it's much more easily available to us on a regular basis. So practice the learning, practice the work, practice by reading, by talking. I'm not suggesting that white people go out and find your first Black friend. That's a burden that is unfair and just adds to the woundedness. Do our work as white people first, and throughout, never stop, and let those relationships develop naturally. Can I talk with you? I don't really want to talk about that. Okay, I respect that. Can I talk to you? Yeah, what do you want to know? And then we begin building the relationships.
Yeah. Wonderful advice. Thank you so much. I'm reminded of conversations that I had. My son-in-law is Black, and my granddaughter is mixed, and he and I have some of the most fascinating conversations, perspectives that I would have no way of knowing, because again, as an American white person, we hear what racism is, but we don't really understand that this is a 24/7 thing. Mike, my son-in-law, he's a retired Air Force veteran, so well respected. You would think that nobody would bother him. But even this well-respected retired military man, he has to worry about when he's driving down the road that he has his hands 10 and 2, and that he's doing everything to not arouse any suspicion by the police. We were in a minor car accident a couple of years ago, and when the police showed up, I'm used to the police being friendly friendly-ish, but they treated him with such suspicion. And because I'm the white lady with this Black man, I was even treated differently, and it was really eye-opening. And this was just a minor event. I think we as white people don't have a clue how deep this really, really goes, do we?
I agree. I don't think that we do. I mean, no, I don't think we do. We don't, flat out. That's the work. There's a woman, Amber Ruffin. She's a comedian on the Seth Meyers, The Late Show with Seth Meyers. And she's written a couple of books with her sister about just stories about the discrimination that they have faced as Black women. And it's every day. It's buying a car. I mean, they told the story of her going to buy a new car, and she settled on the car and said, so if I bring cash, how much of a discount can I get? There's no discount. That's the price. Okay, well, I'll go home and think about it. She calls her white male friend to go back, look at the same car. He gets the price, same price. So if I bring cash, what kind of deal can you make me? We'll knock $4,000 off the price of that car. He says, great. My friend was just here 2 hours ago and you wouldn't give her the same break. Why is that? And they got a hold of her again and said, tell you what, we'll give you $1,000 off this car. After all that. So these are the kind of stories that, Black folks face all the time. And I am forever grateful to Sharon for helping to open my eyes in ways that just simply wouldn't have happened if we hadn't developed that deep, authentic relationship where we trust each other, we love each other, we share completely honestly with each other. What a gift. We both consider this a gift because she's learned things from me that she wouldn't otherwise learn. I've learned things from her. There's no way I would otherwise learn. Really powerful.
Yeah, yeah. Speaking of gifts, you spending time with us and Sharon spent some time with us as well. I so deeply appreciate both of you, sharing your stories and helping to educate the rest of us about, things that are happening all the time and we just don't know about it. And now I want to make sure that I mention your website, the two of them. You've got tomdewolf.com and comingtothetable.org. You've talked about the Coming to the Table website. What do we find on tomdewolf.com?
Oh, it just my books and the Coming to the Table is filled with resources. That website is huge. If people are looking specifically for my books and a little bit more about the work that I do, my website's a great resource. Gatherathetable.net. Sharon and I also have a website. So everybody's got the websites, and it's a good place to get the basics of what the work is. And again, I'm just so grateful to you, Lisa, for inviting both Sharon and me to share our stories. I mean, the more that we can get this kind of information out to a wider audience, I think the better chance we have of repairing some of the damage in our world.
Yeah, exactly. Well, I want to thank you so much for being with us today, Tom. Is there anything that we've left out that you want to make sure that we discuss, or do you feel like we've covered it?
I'm really impressed, Lisa. I thank you for having me on here. And this is, no specifics. Go read books, go watch films, go, have the conversations. Don't be afraid. And pay less attention to the politicians who are trying to get all the power, and pay attention to your heart.
Perfect. Wonderful closing words. Thank you again, Tom DeWolf, for being with us. I genuinely appreciate your time. Thank you.
You bet. Thanks, Lisa.
All right. And I want to remind everyone I've been talking with Tom DeWolf, and I want to thank you for joining us. I hope you enjoyed this conversation in the Ancestral Healing Summit.